Juul markets itself as an alternative to traditional cigarettes, and the e-cigarette giant says its mission is to improve the lives of the world's 1 billion adult smokers. It's not only former smokers that you're converting.
There's been a huge surge of high schoolers using e-cigarettes or vaping.
Well, the FDA calls it an epidemic.
Children's Hospital in Wisconsin is sounding an alarm about serious health problems linked to vaping.
You're nothing but a marketer of a poison, and your target has been young people.
You initially think you're saving the world, and then all of a sudden, like, people are saying, no, you're the devil.
In 2018, Juul was a $38 billion company with an ambitious mission: to give the world's 1 billion cigarette smokers a better, healthier alternative. But just 5 years later, Juul's value had plummeted 95% below its peak, and its mission statement now had an extra sentence: to combat underage usage of their products. Because despite Juul's good intentions, they got millions of underage kids addicted and created a whole new generation of smokers. This is the story of two young entrepreneurs who set out to destroy big tobacco, but who ultimately ended up becoming big tobacco. So get ready, because the rise and fall of Juul is going to be a wild ride. In 2004, two product design students called Adam Bowen and James Monsees crossed paths at Stanford University. Stanford had banned smoking on campus over a decade ago. So during late nights in the design studio, Adam and James snuck out for a smoke break. And because they were both obsessed with design, they looked at their cigarettes and wondered if they could somehow be improved with technology. They realized that the reason many smokers couldn't quit despite the obvious health risks was because they missed the rituals associated with smoking. So Adam and James teamed up to design a product that kept the relaxing, social, and fun elements of smoking, but removed the most harmful aspects. Whilst doing research for their idea, Adam and James stumbled upon something fascinating. They uncovered thousands of emails, business plans, product research, and scientific studies which revealed that big tobacco had secretly been playing with the idea of a safer cigarette since the early 1950s. For big tobacco, it wasn't ideal that their product kills their customers. So they tried to make a cigarette that was just as addictive, but didn't cause cancer. They found that by heating the tobacco inside cigarettes into a vapor, the mix of chemicals produced in the smoke was less toxic than if they were to burn the tobacco completely. The research was promising, but big tobacco had run into a dilemma. Introducing a safer cigarette basically meant admitting that all regular cigarettes were unsafe. So to avoid destroying their own industry, they didn't release any products with this technology for decades. But Adam and James now picked up where big tobacco left off and decided to start their own business to work on this. There were 1 billion cigarette smokers in the world, and so Adam and James figured this was not only a way they could make obscene amounts of money, but also a way to save lives. What could go wrong? After graduating, Adam and James started their company, which they initially called Ploom. The company's mission was to save 1 billion lives, so they genuinely believed that they were the good guys and that big tobacco was the enemy. By mid-2007, Ploom had secured $400,000 in funding from investors, more than enough to hire employees and build a prototype. But from the start, they ran into several issues. Firstly, the early prototypes of the Ploom were faulty, and one of them exploded inside the office. And secondly, it seemed like Adam and James's idea for a safer cigarette had competition. Similar products were already coming to the market. The first e-cigarette to get any real attention was called Enjoy, and soon the vaping industry was taking flight. But Adam and James weren't too worried by the competition. Most vapes were big, tacky, and complicated to use, whereas Adam and James were design geeks and put a lot of thought into the product design. And so when the Ploom was ready to ship in 2009, it was a pretty sleek looking product. Unfortunately, as good as the Ploom looked, in practice it had lots of issues. It still shocked or burned people sometimes, and to fuel it, you had to manually fill a cartridge with butane, which is basically lighter fluid, so it was highly flammable. In other words, it was complicated and dangerous. And not just that, people would often tape two Plooms together just to get a higher nicotine dose, which was a clear sign that the product wasn't doing its job very well. It simply wasn't as satisfying as a cigarette. So basically, smokers thought the Ploom was interesting, but it wasn't gonna change the world. To Adam and James, the Ploom's failure was devastating. They had worked on it for years with relatively little success, and thus the company was now in crisis. They came to the depressing realization they needed to start over from scratch. And that would lead to a new product that they would call the Juul. To become successful, the Juul needed to improve on both major aspects of the Ploom, design and engineering. So on the design side, James focused on making the Juul a tech product. It had to be subtle, minimalistic, and intuitively easy to use. To achieve that, he gave the Juul a modern design with just two parts, a body and a pod. Because of the way these were shaped, everyone instantly knew exactly how they fit together. Over on the engineering side, Adam focused on solving the fundamental problem of user satisfaction. You see, the Juul had to be strong enough to satisfy cigarette smokers, but currently that was impossible. The pure nicotine which was added to vape liquids is naturally bitter, so if Adam matched the nicotine content of a cigarette, the taste was intolerable. But then Adam discovered tobacco industry research on nicotine salts, which dampen the taste of nicotine, burn the throat much less, and can be loaded with pretty much any flavoring. Because of this, Adam could amp up an e-liquid's nicotine content to the point where it was actually stronger than a cigarette, smoother, and tasted of something nice like mango or creme brulee. And so as Adam and James reflected on the new product they'd made, they realized they'd done something remarkable. They had essentially reinvented smoking. You see, before the Juul, the cigarette was the holy grail of all products. Not only are they easy and cheap to manufacture, but the nicotine inside can be as addictive as heroin. So you normally have a customer for life. But of course, the fatal flaw of cigarettes was the health impact on their customers. However, since Juul didn't contain tobacco, people generally believed the Juul was a safer alternative to cigarettes. And from a business perspective, the Juul could be an even more lucrative product. Whilst the Juul kept all the positive aspects people associated with cigarettes, nicotine salts were far more powerful than tobacco, so it was even more addictive. Plus, a Juul could also be used indoors without leaving a horrible smell behind. And while cigarettes burn out, a Juul could be pulled out and put away instantly, meaning people could smoke anywhere, all day if they wanted to. And not just that, the Juul was cool. It had a bunch of flavors, and it looked like something Apple would make. In fact, people later called it the iPhone of e-cigarettes. So naturally, Adam and James were incredibly excited about the Juul. This was it. This is how they were going to save 1 billion lives. All they had to do now was prepare their launch campaign, because they only had one shot at it. If the campaign flopped, they wouldn't get a second chance. But if they got it right, Juul could genuinely change the world. Now, the FDA had a strict set of regulations for tobacco products, but the Juul didn't have any tobacco in it. So whereas traditional cigarettes were extremely restricted in how they could advertise, Juul was free to advertise without any real oversight or regulation. And so to kick their launch campaign off, Adam and James hired Richard Mumby, an influencer who specialized in lifestyle advertising. And this is where things started to go horribly wrong. Adam and James created Juul to help people quit cigarettes. But Juul's new marketing team thought the best way to advertise the product was to make it look cool. And the best way to do that was to get it in the hands of as many young people as possible. The result was a huge social media marketing campaign called #Vaporized, which was filled with colorfully dressed, healthy, dancing millennials. Juul's marketing was eerily similar to what tobacco companies had done many years ago to get new generations hooked on their product. Get young people dancing and having a good time. But whereas tobacco companies couldn't advertise on TV or billboards anymore due to regulation, Juul could. The regulators hadn't caught up yet. For the product launch, Juul hosted influencer parties where thousands of Juuls were given away. It's a classic dealer tactic. The first one is free to get you hooked. And sure enough, Juul gave out plenty of free samples to popular influencers who could help promote it. It seemed like Juul had totally forgotten its original mission of helping people quit cigarettes, and instead the marketing team were just trying to get as many new customers as possible. The ads weren't targeted at smokers trying to quit, it was targeted at young people wanting to look cool. It's even reported Juul took out ads on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, literally websites for kids, and they sold their products online without any age verification. The tragedy was, Juul's product genuinely could help smokers quit cigarettes, but the marketing was instead reaching millions of teenagers who'd never even smoked before, and had no intention of doing so until they heard about Juul. However, after the Juul officially launched in 2016, the FDA hit them with some news that changed everything. To make up for their lack of regulation on e-cigarette products, the FDA announced any new products would need to go through a series of extensive checks before being released. Any existing products on the market could continue selling for 2 more years, but to make even the slightest modification, they would have to go through these new FDA checks, which could take years. This put Adam and James in a desperate position, because their product still had some major issues. Since the Juul was so compact, the liquid inside the pods often sprayed out when people took a puff, which was painful and dangerous. So if they didn't fix their product, it was never going to catch on. Already, some shops had stopped selling the Juul due to this issue. But because of the FDA's new rules, Juul were unable to make any modifications to their product without going through these extensive FDA checks. So, Juul decided to re-engineer the pods without telling the FDA. Now, they were hiding a secret. But whilst they were able to improve the product, in early 2016, Juul was still bleeding money, and so the board decided to remove James as CEO. This turned out to be premature. As summer got underway, sales started picking up. Then they picked up even more, and then they skyrocketed. It turns out the vaporized marketing campaign had been incredibly effective, but since it was largely based on word of mouth, it had just taken a little time for Juul to spread around the country. And as Juul had now secretly improved their product, by early 2017, social media was filled with celebrities and influencers using Juuls, which was the perfect marketing to make it look cool. So Juul started hiring hundreds of new employees and expanding to other countries. Juul was now growing so fast that by the end of the year, it was the fastest company ever to reach a $10 billion valuation, 4 times faster than Facebook. However, as the months went by, Juul started realizing the real reason for the large number of sales. The majority of new Juul users were actually non-smokers who'd now got hooked on nicotine, and many of them were teenagers. And then, worrying posts started popping up.
I started having the cravings more often. I am definitely so addicted to vaping.
And it wasn't this feeling of, oh, I really want nicotine. We need it.
Before 2017, nicotine products were pretty uncommon among minors. Cigarettes were mostly seen as gross by younger generations and weren't being used as much. But Juul's marketing had made smoking popular again, and their many different flavors were an irresistible introduction to smoking for many teens. Some kids thought they were just smoking water vapor, but in reality, one Juul pod contained about as much nicotine as 20 cigarettes, so it was even more addictive than cigarettes. Plus, because e-cigarettes didn't have as many restrictions, you'd see people vape in bars and clubs. People who may have gone out for an occasional cigarette could now smoke constantly at home as it didn't smell. And since the Juul was easy to conceal, it became a perfect way for middle school and high school kids to vape without getting caught. Kids would literally use them in class under their desks and charge their Juuls openly from their computer as it just looked like a USB drive. Plus, with cigarettes, you get to the end and stop. But with Juul, the only stop signal is getting to the end of the pod, which is the nicotine equivalent of an entire pack of cigarettes. So people were smoking far more. You had 15-year-old kids doing the vape equivalent of chain smoking several packs a day. And more kids started using it.
I became so addicted to vaping that it really took over my everything. I was even a gymnast, and I remember not having enough energy to do the things I needed to do.
The proportion of high school teenagers using e-cigarettes has reached nothing short of an epidemic level.
Research suggests nicotine is dangerous for a developing brain and can have lifelong effects, not to mention links to depression and anxiety. But teens didn't even realize they were getting addicted. It was only when they tried to quit that they noticed they didn't feel good if they didn't smoke. In response to this, Juul then pulled another move out of the big tobacco playbook. They went into schools to warn kids about vaping. But this was really a wolf in sheep's clothing. Because of course, if you tell kids they shouldn't do something, it plants the idea they want to do it and rebel. And several students said that when the Juul representatives came to their school, it felt a bit like a sales pitch in disguise. And things were about to get worse. Do you want to create videos like this? If so, you're gonna want to know about today's sponsor, Storyblocks. I've been using Storyblocks for years now, as they have over 1 million video clips, templates, songs, sound effects, and more. So let's say you want to create a smoke effect. Well, you just type smoke in their search box and instantly get different clips and templates to choose from. Then, let's say you want some dark music. You can just filter their songs by mood and download the perfect track. And because all Storyblocks downloads are 100% royalty free, you don't have to worry about copyright claims or getting demonetized. But here's why I really love Storyblocks. Normally with stock footage, you have to pay for every single clip. But with a Storyblocks subscription, you can get unlimited downloads at no extra cost. So it's much more affordable for creators. And it makes it way faster to create great videos, as everything you need is all in one place. So to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/magnates or click the link in the description. When Juul realized this was turning into a teenage epidemic, they completely changed their advertising strategy so it didn't appeal to minors. But the damage was already done. And so Juul was in a terrible position when they faced their next challenge. The 2 years since the FDA made their first push towards regulating e-cigarettes were coming to an end. And now Juul had to undergo a process where they essentially had to prove their product was a net public health benefit to the United States. Given that millions of kids were getting addicted to Juuls at the time, they would have a hard time proving that was the case. A report came out claiming an 80% increase in vape use in high schools, and almost a 60% increase in middle schools. More than 3 million high school students had taken up the habit, so around 1 in every 5 high school students was vaping, and Juul was by far the most popular brand. So the FDA sprung into action and forced Juul to provide their internal documents for review. Around this time, Juul also drew the attention of Altria, the biggest cigarette manufacturer in the US. In the first quarter of 2018, cigarette sales had fallen more than what Altria's models suggested they should have, and they blamed this exclusively on Juul replacing cigarettes. Whilst Altria had launched its own e-cigarette, Juul sales were far ahead of them and doubling every 3 months. Altria considered this a genuine threat to their entire business. But as the pressure on Juul intensified due to the negative media attention and the FDA review, the company was in a vulnerable position, and Altria saw this as an opportunity. They figured if you can't beat them, buy them. So in December 2018, Altria executives met with Juul executives. Rumors began circulating around the company, and on the 20th of December, it was officially announced. Altria was buying a 35% stake in Juul in exchange for a $12.8 billion investment, valuing the company at over $38 billion. Thanks to the stock they owned, Juul's founders Adam and James became billionaires overnight. But all the Juul employees were thinking the exact same thing. They were now working for the enemy. A big chunk of the company was now owned by Big Tobacco, the very industry they'd supposedly been trying to destroy. The original dream of Juul was dead. Hey legends, it's John here, creator of MagnatesMedia. Just wanted to quickly share some exciting news with you. So for those who don't know, MagnatesMedia is not some big company. I literally started this channel by myself from my bedroom, making terrible videos. I couldn't even afford a tripod, so I had a camera on some books, which is why the angle was a bit slanted. So I couldn't have imagined I'd be where I am now. Because now, I get to make videos about whatever topics I find interesting, and I can do it from anywhere in the world as I don't have to be on camera anymore, and I have a small team to help me. Which means that we can get super creative with the videos, like experimenting with 3D and crazy animations. It's like running your own mini film studio where you can make whatever you want. However, the problem is it took me years to figure all this out, like how the algorithm works, how to hire the right people, how to get big sponsors and make more money, all this stuff that creators never publicly talk about. So that's why I spent months and months putting everything I've learned into a simple system that anyone else can follow. For example, if you wanted to run your own channel about true crime, history, tech, finance, sports, whatever it is you're interested in, you can just follow this system I've created. I literally show you everything you need to make a full-time income from YouTube, and all the behind-the-scenes secrets of how I make the videos, and how I grew the channel from 0 to over 1.6 million subscribers. And when you sign up, you'll also get access to a community of other creators. Like, we already have successful channels who've gone through the program who you can connect with. Plus, I'm in the community myself answering questions, so you can literally ask me anything you want so you never feel stuck. Honestly, this is the system I wish I had had when I started out, as it would have saved me years of expensive and time-consuming mistakes. So, if you've ever wanted to grow your own YouTube channel, this system is perfect for you. Just click the link in the description below to claim one of the remaining spaces, or go to magnates.media/system and I'll chat with you inside the community in just a minute. The FDA made a discovery in the documents Juul provided for them. Not only had Juul intentionally targeted non-smokers in their initial marketing campaign, but they hadn't even been able to get concrete evidence for many of the health claims about the benefits of vaping over smoking. As a result, Congress asked James to testify under oath, and the hearing was an embarrassment to Juul.
You, sir, are an example to me of the worst of the Bay Area. You don't ask for permission, you ask for forgiveness. You're nothing but a marketer of a poison, and your target has been young people.
And then, as Juul was nearing its breaking point, the worst possible thing that could have happened, happened.
A high school student collapsing after vaping and was rushed to the hospital.
It took 2 days for my lungs to fail and I almost died.
Number of deaths linked to vaping rising today.
My chest felt like it was collapsing and tightening up and I couldn't breathe.
In July 2019, hospitals around the US started reporting multiple cases of teenagers with eerily similar symptoms. Throat pain, chest pain, lung damage, respiratory failure, and lung collapse. 68 teenagers tragically passed away, and among every patient, they all had one thing in common: they were all heavy vapors. As news of this spread, social media was filled with people destroying their Juuls. Protesters gathered around their office, and Juul sales immediately nosedived. Now, despite the panic, Juul wasn't really at fault here. The hospitalizations were actually caused by black market cannabis vape oils diluted with vitamin E acetate. So the problem was that people were using the Juul device, but not the official Juul pods. But regardless, all eyes were on Juul because of the teen vaping epidemic, so they took the public beating for this tragedy. The Centers for Disease Control took a very public stance against vaping, and individual states hit Juul with a barrage of lawsuits, threatening to take all flavored products off the market. Juul has never been able to recover from this event. Both of the original founders resigned, and all major positions at Juul were soon filled by big tobacco executives. Any remaining members of the original Juul team were completely demoralized. They joined this company for an important mission, and now it felt like Juul had been completely taken over by big tobacco. In fact, much of the entire e-cigarette market was captured by tobacco companies. In 2022, the FDA rejected Juul's application, trying to prove that their product was a net public health benefit, and asked them to take Juul off the market. But Juul was able to appeal the decision. Since then though, Juul has settled thousands of lawsuits and had to pay close to $3 billion in fines. And Juul's valuation fell to around $450 million, 95% down from its peak. Whilst the peak of the teen vaping epidemic was in 2019, newer brands have capitalized on this new generation of smokers, and they've used many of Juul's tactics, like using fun-sounding flavors, influencer marketing, and avoiding regulation through new technologies like synthetic nicotine. Since this is all relatively new, we still don't really know the long-term effects of Juul and vaping yet. Juul's CEO even openly admitted that. But amongst teenagers, there's understandably frustration. One user said, "I'm unfortunately a Gen Z who grew up never wanting to smoke, but in high school, everyone was vaping. I'm also very angry because at the time I started vaping, I was told it was completely harmless and it was basically inhaling water vapor. My generation got so screwed. We were so close to becoming a mostly smoke-free generation, and companies like Juul partnering with Big Tobacco ruined this for us." However, to this day, the public health community is still massively divided on the issue of vaping, because on one hand, Juul really was helping cigarette smokers quit. Vapes contain only a tiny fraction of the carcinogens found in cigarettes, and there were plenty of people who made the switch from cigarettes to Juul and were better off for it, as it helped them cut out tobacco. But whilst it's certainly possible cigarette smokers might be better off vaping from a health perspective, there's also no denying that Juuls were much more addictive than cigarettes, and that millions of people who would have never smoked in the first place only started because of Juul. Millions of minors are now addicted to e-cigarettes. So some feel that by making it so appealing to teenagers, they undid much of the progress that had been made on cutting down on smoking amongst younger generations. Whilst move fast and break things is a popular mantra for tech companies, when it comes to health, Juul is a case study in how you actually can move too fast and then may never recover. So when it comes to Juul's legacy, there's both good and bad. But one thing that's clear about this story is that ever since the 1950s, Big Tobacco wanted to create a product that was just as addictive as a cigarette, but didn't kill its customers. We also note that in 2007, when Juul started, it looked like Big Tobacco was running out of new young customers, or as they called them, replacement smokers. Ironically, Juul actually solved both of these problems for them. They created a less dangerous and more addictive product than a cigarette, and they hooked yet another generation on nicotine. So in the end, did Juul just do Big Tobacco's dirty work for them? I hope you found the story of Juul interesting, but if you want an even more controversial business story, go check out this video right here. I'll see you there in a second. Cheers.